Frank opened the mailbox and pulled out a neatly folded letter. Violation notice, unauthorized flagpole installation. The warm April air carried the scent of cut grass and azaleas from a neighbor's yard. Frank squinted against the sunlight, the pale blue envelope trembling slightly in his hand. He didn't have to open it to know it was from the HOA. The bold sans serif print and unnecessary formality gave it away. Inside, at his modest brick house with its chipped white shutters and porch swing long retired, Frank eased himself down onto the wooden steps. The afternoon breeze made the wind chimes hum a melancholy tune. He unfolded the paper like it was something sacred, though he knew better. His fingers lingered on the embossed letterhead, West Granger Homeowners Association. He glanced across the neatly trimmed lawn toward the old oak tree. Years ago, he'd hung a swing there for his son, Mark. A simple plank seat and some rope, nothing fancy, but it held 1,000 summer afternoons. Now, even a flagpole was too much. Frank sighed, rereading the line, "You are in violation of Article 14b, vertical structures exceeding 6 feet in height are prohibited without prior board approval." Below that, in Marlene's tidy cursive, was a sticky note, "Please address this promptly. Non-compliance may result in fines." The pole wasn't even that tall. It barely cleared the roofline, the brass finial catching sunlight like a watchtower. More than anything, it wasn't just a pole. It was the last thing Mark saluted before deploying. When Frank found the folded flag in that triangle box, the one the officer brought with a solemn face and white gloves, he'd kept it tucked away. Until yesterday. He thought the quiet front yard might welcome something dignified. Something steady. The next morning, George rolled up in his electric scooter, a U.S. Navy decal stuck above the front wheel like a badge of honor. He wore his usual baseball cap pulled low and waved a gloved hand. "You get the HOA kiss of death letter yet?" he called out, grinning. Frank held it up. "I put up a windsock for my grandson's birthday 2 years ago," George said, easing up the driveway. "Took 48 hours to demand I take it down." "Inappropriate animation," they said. Frank cracked a half-smile. "They take that rulebook seriously." "Serious enough to outlaw fun," George replied. "You going to the meeting?" Frank nodded. "Figured I'd say my piece." George leaned in conspiratorially. "Don't expect applause." Later that week, Frank walked the 2 blocks to the HOA building, an overly air-conditioned community center that smelled faintly of Lysol and lemon cookies. He'd ironed his best shirt. The one with the small tear in the cuff he kept meaning to mend. The meeting room had a semicircle of folding chairs. A table up front was draped in navy polyester, behind which Marlene Cresswell perched like a crow on a fence post. She tapped the agenda on the table and adjusted her glasses. "We'll begin promptly. Please, no eating until we conclude. The cookies are for after." Frank took a seat in the back, nodding politely to Mrs. Drummond, who'd once chided him for planting impatiens 2 inches too close to the sidewalk. When item 3 came up, unauthorized flagpole installation, lot 17B, Frank raised his hand. Marlene didn't call on him. Instead, she read the violation out loud, her voice clipped. "We ask that homeowners follow proper protocol for additions. Especially those that may visually disrupt uniform landscaping." Frank tried again. "It's not just. We appreciate your attendance, Mr. Waverly," she cut in. "But we've outlined the procedure in the bylaws. Any further remarks can be submitted in writing." George, across the room, offered a sympathetic shrug. After the meeting, Frank walked home under a moonless sky, his footsteps quiet on the sidewalk. He passed tidy lawns and the occasional solar light flickering like a tired firefly. At home, he opened the door without flipping on the lights. The flagpole stood in the yard, proud and silent. He made himself a cup of decaf, but let it go cold. In the kitchen, the photograph of Mark in uniform stared out from behind a glass frame, the black and white edges curling slightly after years of sun. The picture sat beside his typewriter, the kind with green keys and a ribbon he still replaced by hand. The next morning, the flag was gone. Frank had taken it down before sunrise. No announcements. No ceremony. That night, as dusk pressed its fingers against the windows, Frank sat in the armchair by the front window. The flag, folded neatly, lay in his lap. Outside, the breeze rustled the empty pole bracket. He didn't move for hours. The house was silent except for the ticking of the old wall clock. Just past 9, the doorbell rang. A single chime. He stood slowly, unsure. On the porch stood a young woman with sunburned cheeks and a duffel bag slung over one shoulder. Her smile was cautious but familiar. "Hi, Uncle Frank. It's Emily." "Grandpa, that HOA bylaw. It contradicts federal code." "They're bluffing," Emily said, scrolling on her iPad. Frank chuckled softly, eyes still on the rising steam from his chipped coffee mug. "You sound just like your dad when he argued curfew with me." His voice trembled slightly at the mention, but his eyes held a quiet pride. The corner booth at Annie's diner hadn't changed in a decade. Through the wide window, they could see Main Street beginning to glow with the afternoon sun, shop windows catching light like postcards from the past. The clack of dominoes came from the next table, where 4 retirees debated whether Earl had really cheated last Thursday. Annie drifted between tables with the effortless grace of someone who'd refilled coffee since Carter was president. Frank reached for the sugar bowl, then stopped as Emily turned her screen toward him. "According to Georgia code," she said, tapping, "flagpoles under 15 feet, used for memorial purposes, are exempt from residential ordinances unless they present a hazard." "That HOA letter?" "Toothless." Frank raised an eyebrow. "And you know this because..." "I was a semester from finishing law school before I paused. This is my version of light reading." Across the diner, Annie brought over 2 plates, grilled cheese and tomato soup for Emily, a plain ham sandwich for Frank. She smiled, setting them down. "Still like it plain, huh, Frank? No mustard, no frills." "You remember too much, Annie." "I remember you helped fix my fence in 2004 after that windstorm. I remember what matters." She looked to Emily, winked, and walked off with a fresh pot of coffee swinging from her hand. That evening, back at Frank's house, Emily spread out papers across the dining table. The faded handbook from the HOA was among them, stiff with age, the edges yellowed. She tapped her finger on a page. Clause G, ratified in 2008. Flagpoles erected for personal memorial purposes may be permitted at board discretion and shall not exceed 15 feet. Frank leaned over. "That clause hasn't been mentioned in years." Emily looked up. "Marlene never mentioned this, right?" "No," Frank said. "She just quoted that 14B rule." Emily leaned back, her ponytail brushing the chair. "Then we have something. If the HOA revised the rules and removed Clause G without a full vote, it might not be valid." They stayed up late, poring over bylaws. Frank watched his granddaughter work, highlighting, typing notes, toggling tabs between Georgia law, federal guidelines, and obscure court rulings. She moved with quiet confidence, her brow furrowed, and a pencil tucked behind her ear. At one point, Frank handed her an old envelope. "This was the last letter Mark sent from overseas," he said. Emily held it reverently. "Can I include some of this in the letter?" He hesitated, then nodded. "If it helps someone listen." Emily drafted the letter on her laptop and had Frank read it aloud. Every word felt measured, calm but firm, quoting both state and federal law, citing the memorial nature of the flagpole. She attached a photograph, Frank in uniform, saluting the very flag in question, taken decades ago. "I want them to see this is about more than policy," Emily said. Frank reached for the old typewriter in the corner and added a note at the bottom, typed in green ink, "This flag honors a son, not a statement." By morning, the letter was printed, sealed, and boxed with the photograph inside. Emily drove it to the post office herself, using expedited shipping with a tracking number, and addressed it to the HOA board, and another copy to Congressman Harold Vance, Frank's old Army buddy now serving in the state legislature. Later that afternoon, while Emily helped Frank download a basic email app on the dusty smartphone she found in his kitchen drawer, the doorbell rang. George stood there, cap askew and holding a manila folder. "Thought you should see this," he said, lowering his voice. "Marlene's been revising the bylaws without board votes. Helen, you remember Helen from Lot 9? She brought this to me." Inside the folder were minutes from old meetings, and a gap. The vote to rescind Clause G. Never logged. Emily grinned. Then it was never legal. George chuckled. "You two make quite the team." That night, Emily curled up in the guest room, reading her law notes as cicadas sang outside. Frank typed slowly in the kitchen, letters clicking like distant drums. It felt good to be doing something. Not angry, not loud, just right. As the house settled into quiet, a ping from Emily's iPad startled her. She reached for it, saw a screenshot from the neighborhood message board. Marlene had posted in bold font. "Any further discussion about the flag issue will result in fines. This matter is closed." The congressman replied. Emily shouted from the porch, waving an envelope with a gold seal. Frank, nestled in his usual chair on the back patio with the morning paper folded on his lap, looked up slowly. His coffee sat untouched, cooling in the spring sun, but a rare smile formed as he stood to meet her. "He still remembers the coffee I spilled on his campaign shirt back in '84, Frank muttered, accepting the envelope with a reverence usually reserved for folded flags. Emily grinned. "That was in the letter." "He wrote it on the bottom." "Still can't get the stain out." They opened the envelope together under the wide sky, the cypress trees whispering overhead. The contents were brief but pointed. Congressman Harold Vance acknowledged receiving the Flagpole letter, called the issue deeply personal and emblematic of broader concerns, and stated he had requested a review from the county's Civil Affairs Committee. A postscript, in his looping cursive, read, "Keep standing tall, soldier." The words were like oxygen. By noon, Emily had set up Frank's phone to snap a photo of the makeshift flagpole now temporarily mounted in a flowerpot of bricks in the backyard. The flag, though still folded from the night before, caught just enough breeze to lift its edge. She uploaded the photo to the West Granger Community Facebook group with a caption that read, "My grandfather, a veteran, is being fined for honoring his son's memory. This is the flag from Mark's final tour. HOA rules shouldn't silence respect." Reactions were immediate. Dozens of thumbs up, hearts, and a handful of angry face emojis flooded the post. One comment read, "I never even voted on that HOA board. Who are they to decide?" Another, "This is shameful. Let the man fly his flag." Later that afternoon, as the sun dipped lower, a maroon station wagon pulled into the driveway. A young woman stepped out, camera slung around her neck. "Hi there. Janet Linwood, Granger County Chronicle. I'd love to ask a few questions if that's all right." Frank hesitated, then nodded once. They sat at the same patio table, the flag behind them. Emily joined, her iPad ready just in case. Janet asked questions gently, about Mark, the flag, the original installation, and the recent warning letters. Frank spoke slowly, but clearly. When he described Mark's deployment, Emily noticed his voice drop, like his heart still felt the weight of each word. By the time Janet left, she promised to email the article before it ran. "It should be on the Sunday front page," she added. "The community will want to see this." That evening, a cream-colored envelope arrived, slipped under the door without a knock. Emily opened it while Frank sliced apples in the kitchen. Second notice, you remain in violation of Article 14b. Fines will commence immediately at a rate of $100 per day. Failure to comply may result in further action. At the bottom, Marlene's signature gleamed in ballpoint blue. Frank didn't say a word. He simply placed the apple slices on a plate, brought them to the table, and sat down. Emily, her lips pressed thin, snapped a photo of the letter. "They're not even pretending to be subtle anymore," she said. George arrived not long after, carrying a box of donuts and 2 paper cups of black coffee. "Thought you might need these." He eased into a chair and looked at Frank. "Remember our last campout? Mark was 12, and you made him hoist the flag at dawn." Frank nodded slowly. He insisted on folding it himself every night too. Kept practicing until he got it perfect. George smiled wistfully. That boy had discipline. Even then. Emily watched them both. You two were like family. George tipped his coffee. Still are. The next morning, the newspaper thunked onto the porch with more weight than usual. Frank picked it up and unfolded the front page. The headline stretched across the top. Veteran told to remove flagpole honoring fallen son. Below it was a photo of Frank, seated, hands on his lap, the folded flag and Emily beside him. The article was fair, factual, and unmistakably sympathetic. By mid-morning, cars slowed in front of the house. Some neighbors waved. One left a small bouquet at the gate. Others honked gently in solidarity. That afternoon, Emily read the newest HOA post aloud as Frank fixed the bird feeder. Any further discussion about the flag issue will result in formal penalties and community service requirements. No exceptions. This is not up for public debate. She looked up. So much for transparency. Frank simply shook his head. Desperate people double down. Just before sunset, another envelope arrived, this time delivered by a man in a tan blazer, who offered no smile. Emily opened it with steady hands. You are hereby requested to attend a closed-session HOA meeting this Thursday evening. No outside representation permitted. Attendance mandatory. Frank didn't speak. He reached for the paper, his fingers brushing the edge. Emily narrowed her eyes. We're not walking into that unprepared. She tapped her iPad. From now on, we record everything. They won't trick us twice. Emily slapped a faded HOA handbook on the kitchen table. Clause G. It's still valid. The room fell still. Dust hung in the golden morning light streaming through the curtains. Frank set down his mug of black coffee, eyes narrowing behind old glasses. That clause, he murmured. We wrote that after Charlie died. Emily's fingers brushed over the yellowed page like it was a sacred artifact. Memorial exemption. Enacted in 2008. It allows flagpoles under 15 feet if erected in remembrance of a family member who served. No expiration date. No amendment record. Frank took the book gently, flipping through the worn pages. His thumb paused on Charlie's name listed in the community petition. We drafted this on Marlene's kitchen table. Her husband signed it too. That's going to matter, Emily said. Especially if it was never formally repealed. Later that afternoon, the two stood under the fluorescent lights of the Granger County Clerk's Records Office. The walls, lined with photos of high school honor students and blue ribbon chili winners, gave the room a kind of faded glory. The clerk, a woman in her 60s with horn-rimmed glasses and a pink sweater set, took one look at the handbook and nodded slowly. That clause, she said. I remember it. Made quite a stir that year. Let me check our ledgers. Minutes ticked by before she returned with a slim file, yellowed and crinkled. She laid it out carefully. Clause G, past April 2008. Still on file. No formal repeal. Emily exhaled. Can we get a certified copy? Sure can. $10 and a handshake. Back home, Emily drafted a response letter while Frank typed on his old Smith Corona. They attached scans of the certified clause and cited Georgia state code regarding preservation of HOA bylaws. When they dropped the envelope into the mailbox, Emily said, legally, they can't ignore this. But the HOA could try. The emergency meeting was held in the community center, a low-slung building with fluorescent lights that hummed louder than the members' voices. Frank sat in the second row, stiff and silent. Emily was instructed to remain in the back as a non-resident. Marlene, in a seafoam blouse and matching lipstick, banged her gavel without flair. We are here to address continued non-compliance. The board finds that Clause G is obsolete. No longer enforceable. It was superseded in the 2015 revisions. Emily stood. There's no record of that repeal in the clerk's office. Marlene didn't look up. You are not recognized. Please sit. Benji, seated 2 seats down from Marlene, looked between the two. His jaw clenched, but he said nothing. Later, as the board argued over a proposed fine increase, Emily reached into her tote and pressed a small button on the voice recorder she'd nestled beside her notebook. Her fingers stayed still, her face unreadable. Then came Marlene's unmistakable voice. Just adjust the minutes to show we discussed a repeal in 2015. No one reads those anyway. Benji flinched. The meeting adjourned with no resolution. People filed out slowly, murmuring. Some avoided eye contact. Others gave Frank a small nod of support. Outside, the air had cooled. Crickets sang softly along the hedges. Emily walked toward the car, her mind racing. Benji stood just beyond the steps, hands in his jacket pockets. When she reached him, he looked over his shoulder and then said quietly, "We need to talk. Tonight." Benji handed Emily a flash drive. Everything she said. Recorded. Use it. The plastic case felt warmer than it should have. Emily looked at him, eyebrows raised. You're sure? Benji nodded, lips thin. She crossed a line. It's time. Frank stood in the doorway of the kitchen, arms folded, unsure. He's her son. Are you sure we can trust him? Emily gave a quiet, firm smile. He's her son. That's exactly why we can. Benji's house looked like a Radio Shack exploded. Wires spilled from open drawers. Old routers blinked uselessly beside unplugged speakers. ESPN played softly on the TV while a digital clock blinked 12 o'clock in the background. The air smelled like solder and reheated pizza. This, all of it? Emily asked, slipping the drive into her laptop. Benji tapped the keyboard for her. I edited nothing. You'll want timestamp 11 minutes, 34 seconds. That's where she tells the board to rewrite the meeting minutes. And again at 22 minutes, she threatens to fine the Wilsons for having a protest sign. Emily's jaw tightened. This isn't just negligence. It's manipulation. That afternoon, she clipped a clean 30-second segment and uploaded it to the private Granger Community Watch Facebook group. The post was simple: listen. Decide for yourself. Within an hour, the little red circle of notifications spun like a washing machine. Comments flooded in. Is this real? I knew she was shady. This isn't the Granger I moved into. By sunset, it had over 200 shares. Meanwhile, across town, Annie prepared trays of banana bread and carafes of black coffee. A cardboard sign in the window read, "Coffee and Community, 7 p.m. discussion." At one table, domino tiles clacked. At another, Mr. Haynes read the paper, glasses low on his nose. Emily arrived just before 7 with Frank. She pulled her hoodie tight and tried not to fidget. One by one, townsfolk trickled in, quiet at first, eyes darting. A retired couple from House 22. A teacher with a clipboard. George rolled in on his scooter, parked by the jukebox. When the room reached 20 people, Annie rang a little bell. Let's talk. No yelling. Just facts. Emily played the full clip. Murmurs turned into sharp intakes of breath. She threatened the Wilsons. She edited the minutes. I'm calling my sister, she's a paralegal. Then, the door opened. Marlene walked in, her heels loud on the linoleum. Seafoam suit sharp, jaw tighter than ever. She scanned the room like a general entering hostile territory. Turn that off, she snapped. This is a private matter. You have no right. No right? Annie asked, arms folded, apron dusted with flour. You're in my diner. Emily didn't move. The clip continued, echoing from her laptop. Marlene slammed her hand on a table. Enough. This is slander. You're playing games you don't understand. The room froze. Someone's phone clicked, recording. "Ma'am," Mr. Haynes said calmly, "you should sit down." Marlene pointed at Emily. "You'll regret this." "I doubt it," Emily replied. The next morning, the video of Marlene's outburst was trending on a small Reddit thread titled HOA Gone Wild. The clip, her red face, wagging finger, the way she said, "You people," had the comments section buzzing. A local reporter asked for permission to reprint it. Benji didn't go home that night. Instead, he joined Frank and Emily for breakfast, dry toast and scrambled eggs. "She forgot what this neighborhood used to stand for," he said, eyes on the newspaper. Frank passed the jelly. "We remember." Later that day, Frank sifted through his mail. Mixed in with grocery circulars and a water bill was an envelope with an embossed seal. He opened it slowly. Inside was a single line, typed in clean font. "Let's talk about the flagpole." Congressman Harold Vance pulled up in a tan Buick. "Frank, you've stirred up quite the storm." He stepped out, adjusted his blazer, and looked at the small crowd gathering on Frank's front lawn. The makeshift flagpole, a temporary PVC pipe zip-tied to a garden trellis, still stood beside the porch. The flag hung low in the still spring air, the edges frayed but clean. A yellow ribbon fluttered at the base. Frank met him halfway down the walkway. "Didn't expect a visit in person." Vance chuckled, clapping Frank on the shoulder. "After that diner footage hit the newswire? I'd have to be deaf, dumb, and blind not to come." Emily stepped onto the porch, wiping her hands on her jeans. "Grandpa, did you ever think one flag could cause all this?" Frank took a deep breath, eyes fixed on the stars and stripes. "Never figured a piece of cloth would need a lawyer and a congressman to stay up." The town's courthouse lawn had been freshly mowed, and folding chairs lined the sidewalk in uneven rows. Local media vans idled nearby, antennae raised. A wooden podium stood crookedly beneath the county seal, a slight lean suggesting it had been pulled from storage that morning. Frank arrived with Emily and George, who had traded his scooter for a borrowed walker with tennis balls on the feet. Annie passed out small paper cups of lemonade from a thermos. The mayor nodded politely from the shade of a dogwood tree. When Vance stepped to the podium, the hum of cameras clicked into rhythm. "Today," he began, "we affirm that respect for veterans isn't optional. It isn't subject to neighborhood politics. The memorial exemption, originally passed in 2008 by this very HOA, remains in effect." A cheer rose from the crowd. "We've confirmed with the county clerk. Clause G is valid. And as of this moment, the HOA is under formal review for procedural misconduct. Any fines issued under this dispute are hereby suspended." Frank stood still. Emily grinned. George raised his cane slightly and muttered, "About time." From across the street, Marlene watched, arms folded. She wore a powder blue blouse and a scowl. No one stood beside her. Even Benji stayed home. Reporters buzzed around her, but she pushed past them, muttering something about personal attacks and misinformation. The next morning, petitions to remove Marlene from her post spread faster than discount flyers. Annie kept a copy at the diner counter, tucked beside the napkin holder. By the afternoon, over 100 signatures filled the sheet, each a careful pen stroke from someone who had once looked the other way. Frank sat at the kitchen table, running a hand along the back of his neck. Never thought it'd come to this. Emily refilled his coffee. Neither did she. 2 days later, Marlene submitted a formal notice to the HOA board, effective immediately, "I will be taking a temporary leave of absence for personal reasons." Nobody was surprised. That Saturday, the neighborhood came out for a different kind of gathering. Emily wore work gloves and directed a few teenagers as they helped measure and pour cement into the post hole. George handed her a level. The new flagpole was steel, 10 feet taller than the last one. Frank stepped forward, sleeves rolled, wearing a collared shirt with a faint outline of his old unit's insignia stitched over the chest. His hands shook as he helped guide the pole upright. As they secured the base, a small boy with a mop of curly hair ran up, tugging at Frank's pant leg. "Sir," he said, offering a folded piece of paper, "this is for you." Frank knelt, unfolding it carefully. A crayon drawing showed a waving American flag, stick figures saluting, and a bold, misspelled caption, "Thank you for your service." Frank's throat tightened. Emily smiled, tears catching sunlight. She picked up the flag, the same one that had started it all, and held it to the sky. "Let's make it tall this time." Frank sat quietly in the front row as a new HOA chair took the podium. "Let's begin with old business, item 1, the flagpole." The folding chairs creaked slightly as neighbors shifted in their seats, sipping lukewarm coffee and nibbling on cookies arranged in careful rows on a collapsible table. The community center, usually quiet on a Saturday morning, buzzed with a cautious optimism. A vase of silk carnations sat near the entrance, a leftover from bingo night. At the front, Mrs. Cartwright adjusted her glasses and cleared her throat. "We've reviewed the 2008 handbook," she began, holding up a worn binder. Clause G, the memorial exemption, was never repealed. Therefore, Mr. Waverly's flagpole installation is and has always been within his rights. A murmur ran through the room. Frank remained still, but Emily's eyes gleamed as she glanced sideways at her grandfather. Mrs. Cartwright continued, "The previous fines levied against Mr. Waverly will be voided. A letter of apology will be issued by the HOA board." Benji, seated at the edge of the head table, tapped his notes once, then stood. "We're here to build community," he said, voice even. "This neighborhood should stand for more than hedges and fences." A few heads nodded. Mr. Haynes clapped, slow but steady, soon joined by others. George dabbed at his eyes with a napkin and muttered something about pollen. When it came time for Frank to speak, he stood with deliberate care. "I'm not here for compensation," he said. "I only want to raise a flag like I used to, with my son." The room went still. Annie placed a gentle hand on her husband's shoulder. The silence carried its own kind of reverence. After the meeting, folks gathered outside Frank's house. The old hole had been filled and reinforced, cement set firm. The new flagpole stood taller than before, gleaming in the morning sun. At its base, a brass plaque read, "In memory of Charlie Waverly." Emily held the flag as Frank guided it upward. When it caught the breeze, it snapped gently, proud and high above the rooftops. A couple from down the block approached Frank, eyes bright. "How do we sign up for community duty?" the young man asked. "We want to help." Frank smiled, shook their hands. "You just did." Behind them, Annie's portable speaker played "God Bless America." The tune drifted across trimmed lawns and garden gnomes, weaving into conversations and quiet moments. George stood beside Frank, blinking quickly. "Darn allergies." Emily laughed. "You don't even have grass." Frank took a deep breath, looked around at his neighbors, their faces open and warm. Then the mail carrier stepped onto the porch, handed Frank a small postcard. The front showed a watercolor of the town square in spring bloom. On the back, in simple cursive, it read, "I was wrong." He turned it over, staring at the signature. Marlene. The flag rippled gently in the early summer breeze, catching sunlight on its edges. Frank stood beside the pole, adjusting the rope until the clips aligned just right. The morning had come soft and gold, with birdsong drifting lazily from the edge of the park. Across the lawn, neighbors placed folding chairs in rows, some balancing pie trays, others setting pitchers of sweet tea on gingham-covered tables. It was Memorial Day, and the town had gathered. "You see that, Charlie?" Frank whispered, eyes fixed on the flag as it fluttered. "She still flies." Emily stepped forward, a note card in her hand, though she didn't need to glance at it. Her voice was clear, touched with feeling. "Every flag tells a story," she said. "This one tells 2 generations, my grandfather's, and my father's." It stood for service, for sacrifice, and this past month, for principle. People nodded. George muttered, "Amen," under his breath, wiping his brow with a cloth napkin. Frank took the microphone next. He didn't look at his notes. "I never fought for lawn heights," he said, voice low but steady. "I fought for dignity. For the right to remember, to stand for something. And this neighborhood? We just did that, together. Applause rose, genuine and warm. Annie bustled through the crowd, refilling cups and delivering free slices of banana pie to veterans. You eat this, Frank, she said, handing him a piece with extra whipped cream. Or I'll send Emily after you. George arrived with a tray of cherry tarts. Maid and myself, he announced. Sort of. Annie supervised. Laughter mixed with the breeze, and for a while, it felt like the kind of morning everyone hoped for, simple, honest, shared. Photos were taken, and someone started a hashtag #GrangerFlagStory. It caught on fast. Kids ran barefoot in the grass while older residents recounted their own memories of service and family and the time HOA banned inflatable Santas. Later, Annie's diner welcomed the crowd. The special menu read, Veterans Morning, first cups on us. George sat at the domino table. Emily helped rearrange chairs for a group of seniors. Someone turned on a classic vinyl, something soft and brassy, maybe Glenn Miller. A few HOA members approached Emily, inviting her to join as a youth advisor. She smiled, gracious. I think I've done my part, she said. But thank you. Near sunset, Frank stood again at the flagpole, a small frame in his hand. He attached it below the flag, an old photograph of a young man in uniform, smiling in sepia. For you, Charlie, he murmured. As the wind caught the flag and lifted it fully, it passed across the photo like a salute. The brass plaque at the base shimmered. Emily stood nearby, quiet, eyes damp but proud. A boy tugged at Frank's sleeve. Were you in the war? He asked. Frank nodded. Yes, he said. And this flag saw all of it. The boy looked up at the cloth, then back at Frank with wide-eyed respect. Cool, he whispered. That night, when the house was quiet again, Frank sat at the kitchen table with his old typewriter. He fed in a single sheet of cream paper and began to type. If you need help, I'll bring my toolbox. He folded the letter, slid it into an envelope addressed to a neighbor at the end of the street, the one now being told to uproot her flower bed. As he sealed it, he looked out the window. The flag moved in the darkening sky, its silhouette cutting across the porch light. Emily, just upstairs, smiled in her sleep. The flag flew on. The flag that once sparked controversy now waves gently above a home that stood firm in quiet defiance. What began as one man's stand became a town's awakening, proof that even the smallest act of remembrance can ripple outward with unexpected strength. When rules are twisted to control rather than serve, communities falter, but when people come together, fairness finds its way home. Perhaps it's never too late to speak with kindness, to push back with dignity, and to remind others of what truly matters. Like a flag catching morning light, truth has a way of shining through.